Welcome to All Right in Sin City, a podcast about writers and writing in the Windsor-Detroit region. Your podcasters today are
Sarah Jarvis, former bookseller, publishing rep, and literary festival chair.
Kim Conklin, Windsor-based writer and filmmaker.
And me, Irene Moore Davis, author, educator, and local historian.
Our guests today are Marty Gervais and André Narbonne. The Publishing Practicum is a different kind of University of Windsor English course. It's like a year-long internship for a group of students who take one or two books per year through the steps of the publishing process, from editing to book design to creating a promotional campaign and a book launch. Marty Gervais, journalist, author, poet laureate emeritus, and publisher of Black Moss Press, has supervised the program for more than 20 years. 2024 is his final year at the helm, and he's turning it over to award-winning author and U of W professor, Dr. André Narbonne. They're both joining us today to talk about the history of the program, the two books that the practicum launched this year, and what the future holds for this popular educational experience. Welcome, Marty and André.
Hello.
Okay, our first question is kind of to both of you. The Publishing Practicum, as we say, is a different kind of program in the English department. What makes it such a unique experience for students, and what value do they take away from it?
I think that the difference of this course from other courses is that it engages students in editing work that they've never seen before. Raw manuscripts, learning how to present that work in terms of marketable books. The thing is that most of these students are third and fourth year, so they've gone through 3 or almost 4 years of analyzing literature, looking at all the various genres, and so they're given all these tools, and normally they would graduate with all those tools and know where to use them. And so this course gives them an opportunity to evaluate poems or fiction or nonfiction, whatever books that we're doing, and giving them the confidence to actually, to take on that task. And so the course is different, I think, in that sense, that it really is, as you mentioned, an internship. And so you learn by doing. You learn by failing. I like it when they fail at something. It's not a matter of giving them a poor grade. It's a matter of saying, you need to do this over again. And it's not quite there. And it's also a course where the students get to actually collaborate, and we value opinion. We value, different points of view, and sometimes the craziest idea is put forward, and a lot of students will just sort of say, "Oh, that's silly," or "That's crazy," and then I might look at it and say, "Well, let's explore it anyway." And I've seen that where it's landed up creating the cover of a book, and yet it was just a silly, thrown out idea that everyone laughed at initially. So it's a course of collaboration. It's a course of putting faith in what the students have to offer. I'm, after 21 years or so of doing this, I'm not surprised when, that they can come up with something that's valuable, that is full of insight, that has value, and will basically, get people's attention. So that's how it's different.
If I could add, I think that during your undergrad, sooner or later, a student will ask, well, how did this book get here? Why this book? And why does it look this way? So the practicum gives them the other side of things, shows them how the book is constructed, why it was constructed the way it was, not just the physical aspects, because they're editing it too, and they're making value judgments about content.
Yeah, they certainly do. And I think, the mantra, well, not necessarily a mantra, but what I tell them all the way through this course, by the time you get finished this book, you will never look at a book the same way again. So when you walk into Biblioasis bookstore or Indigo or any other store or library, and you look at a book, you're going to think, gee, I don't think that cover reflects actually what's going on in that book. And or why did they do that with that cover? Or I don't like the way the introduction is in this book in terms of where it is physically in the book. Maybe it's on the left facing page rather than the right facing page, or the topography is too crammed. The leading is not perfect. They're going to look at all of those elements and judge them. So when they pick up a book, they're not just going to receive it and welcome it the way they used to, and not judge it. They're going to look at paper quality and say, the paper is really thin. I can, if I'm reading this in the sunlight and I happen to turn the page, I might actually see all the type on the other side of the page. And so it should have been a 60 pound, rather than, 30 pound, and that kind of thing. They're going to look at books differently.
How does the art of the book relate to the art of what's inside, the art of the writing itself? In a sense, it's kind of, without going overboard with this, it's kind of like a cooking class where we're teaching them how to grow the food they're going to cook.
Mm-hmm. And they get lots of spoons are going into the into the soup and tasting and saying, I think it needs a little bit more of this or that. So, and that's what actually happens. I mean, I saw, for example, there was a book that we did by Bruce Meyer, 1967. It was celebrating that particular important year in our history. We had the book entirely laid out. It was ready to go off to the printer. Literally, like within a day, it was going off to the printer. I was reading a Globe and Mail story that morning about the very first franchise that had opened in Hamilton for the Tim Hortons. And I suddenly realized, and it was 1967. And I thought, we need a poem from Bruce Meyer on this. And so I had the students, I said, ask Bruce if he could write a poem. I know it's last minute, but he has to write it today. And so they called him and he says, I was just a little boy. I was actually at the opening of that franchise. And he wrote the poem that day and we slipped it into the layout and it was done. And that's when you have those kinds of things happening in this course, that's not pre-planned. That's not someone working on a syllabus, 2 years in advance or 2 seasons in advance. That's something that actually happens as we are going along. And those little surprises really bring excitement. And it opens the eyes of the students, I think. It really does. It gives them a sense that they're part of the creation.
They're also part of the history. They're looking at the history of the city with the books that we're doing most recently. And with 1967, it's a history that they didn't know, or they only know it from books. And they're creating something for another audience, for an audience that isn't themselves, trying to make that marketable.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. No, I think it was fun actually working on Where the Map Begins, the book of neighborhoods and wards of Windsor, and finding the stories and the various accounts of how the city developed. I think it was interesting for the students because, as André says, it's dipping into a history that they, in some cases, they don't know anything about, and yet they've walked by certain buildings. And I mean, I don't know how many, for example, how many students would be even aware of the old Windsor Star building, of the history of it. And I mean, many students who are maybe even new to Windsor would just say, well, that's just the University of Windsor building.
Or the John Richardson Memorial Library. The first novel written by a native-born Canadian was written in Sandwich, and there's a library for him that's now being used as a daycare.
Yeah, and as far as they're concerned, yeah, they might think that John Richardson was a trustee for the Windsor Board of Education. It was named after him, and not know who he is. And so,
but even the people working in the daycare don't know who he was.
Yeah.
So,
So, Marty,
um,
you've been with this practicum at the University of Windsor since the very beginning. How did
Yes.
it get started, and what were the biggest challenges in getting it going?
Oh, well, how it started was initially the university had asked me to come in and teach a creative writing course. And I went in and did that, and it was supposed to be a one-off thing. I didn't even have a syllabus. It was 2 days before the course started. And I hadn't even been in a university in terms of the academic setting per se. So I'd forgotten about preparing syllabi and all of that kind of stuff. So I showed up, I taught the course, and as I went along, I gathered up material, and that was it. I'm tossing it all away. I had lunch with Wyman Herendeen, who was the head of the English department, and and we were just talking at length about university, and I said to him, "What you really need at the university is a course in involving editing and publishing." And I don't know, I had a ton of ideas, and we had our lunch and had several glasses of wine, and I went on my way, and I got a call in August, and Wyman Herendeen said, "So we have the course ready." And I said, "What are you talking about?" The editing practicum. I said, "What's that?" And he said, "It's what we talked about at lunch." I said, "That was so long ago. Like, why are you telling me this?" And he says, "Well, because, you're going to come and teach it with me." And I thought, well, this is, no one's really, I haven't had a conversation with you since that lunch, and you've created the course. And so he drew up a syllabus. I gave him some ideas of what I wanted to do, and we started the course. And we started it by doing some chapbooks, and then later on, Suzanne Matheson, who teaches in the romantics courses, and she got involved in this, and we delved into looking at some of the work by Raymond Kanister, who was writing poetry that was appearing in magazines in Paris alongside Scott Fitzgerald and Ernest Hemingway. And he was from Essex County. He was actually writing book reviews for the Border Cities Star. And so we explored him and his family, and we did some chapbooks with that. And then what happened was that Carl Jurgens came, to the university to take over the English department. And I immediately said to him, I said, the frustrating thing for me is that we get to December where the students have edited these works, and then I go off and publish them. So they're missing out on the next part. So he jumped on it right away. Thankfully, he saw the value in that and created the publishing practicum, whereby students take what they've edited, they decide what's going to cover, they decide on the typography, they decide on the whole look and feel of the book, and then they figure out, how do we get it marketed, and how do we get it published? And if we do publish it, where are we going to publish it? And in terms of how many copies and distribution and all of that. So this is where Black Moss Press has stepped in from the very beginning, to provide, that as a facilitator, in a sense. And so we do the books and we publish them. That's kind of like overall history of it.
So, Marty, the students learn lots of valuable things, but what's the most valuable thing that you have learned during your tenure? What have the students taught you?
Oh my gosh. They when I go into it, I have an idea of what I want the book to look like, like in terms of the physical book. I have an idea of what I want to do, like to step back. In terms of the editing, I have an idea of how the book should be shaped. I don't tell them what that idea is. I my hope is that that I can lead them in that direction. And I gently am leading them in that direction. And then they surprise the hell out of me and come up with issues, problems, ideas that that are so much, that I should have paid attention to. And so I find that the best thing to do is to leave yourself open for that. And I leave myself open to be challenged. I might suggest certain things to them, and they learn to be comfortable enough to challenge me on that, and not in a negative way, but to say, we think we should go in this direction. And so I will give them I hand over some of the authority to them to do that, knowing full well that some things can't be done. Like, for example, in the practicum course, there are individual assignments that they have to do, like in any university course. But in most cases, these assignments are all linked to the final product. I'm probably a little bit more, give them a little bit more leeway. For example, if a student comes in and says to me, hands me a paper, and says, I had a midterm yesterday and I really didn't do 100% on this. And I'll say to them, well, why would I read it? If you haven't given me 100%, why should you waste my time? But I'll give it back to them and say, look, I'll tell you what, have it to me by 8 o'clock tomorrow morning and do it over again. Or if I know it can be done better, I'll give it back to them, because I try to tell them this is like a business. So if you're working for me and you don't do something properly, I don't say, well, oh, that's not done very well, I'm sorry, but I'll accept it. No, I won't accept it. I give it back to them. And however, that being said, there are deadlines that can't be changed. And on day one of the class, I'll give them the date of when we're launching this book. So in September, I walk in and I'll write down April 3rd or April 2nd, and I'll tell them, plan on that. So you have to be there. That's your final exam. And I think what I've learned is that they can come up with some of the most amazing ideas. And if you allow them to be creative, and if they're engaged in the course, it's so obvious that they can come up with great ideas. And so I kind of foster that environment. I mean, not everyone. I mean, let's be realistic. I mean, not every student. There's a history of some students not participating the way they should. But sometimes it takes a while for them to get fired up. Some of the students will say, like some of the students this particular year said that on the first day they were absolutely scared because of the enormous amount of work that was before them. But I find that once they get engaged, they get committed, they get involved, they take ownership really over these books, and it becomes their book. Especially when I tell them their name is going to be in the book, and their name doesn't go in, and it doesn't say, this particular student is a University of Windsor student. It says they're a member of the editorial or production team of Black Moss Press. So they really can use this as a reference on their resume.
Their responses to the project all sound very familiar in the real working world. That's the way people react, right? So
Absolutely, yeah.
So
Absolutely.
let's talk about this year's books. Both of them are location-based poetry anthologies. Where the Map Begins features local poets writing about wards in Windsor, and What Time Can't Touch pays homage to the historic community of Amherstburg. And I've got two kind of overarching questions for both of you about this. Why the two anthologies, and how did you pull together the teams of poets? And then also, how would you characterize each book? What is the personality or tone of each?
Okay. Well, the reason for the two books, it was my idea to do a book called Where the Map Begins. I mean, I didn't come up with that title, but um, my idea, I mean, I love this. I love the city. I love the history of this community. I think we have so much to offer the rest of the world and the rest of the country and all of that. I think we have such a wealth of wonderful stories, and I've tried this in a number of different ways myself. But I thought, if you were to stop anybody on the street and say to them, "What ward do you live in?" They're probably going to say, I don't know. They may not even know, who their ward counselor is. But if you were to give them the name of a counselor, they might know who that counselor is, and it just so happens that counselor might be the one in their ward. So, but my idea was that because I drive all over the city, and I think I can probably tell you a story about just about every ward in the city. I may not know the particular ward that I'm in at that moment geographically, but if you cite a particular street corner or area in the city, I can probably give you an idea. So in some cases, I gave the students or the poems or the poets rather ideas on what they could write, and so that was my idea to kind of write the history of Windsor geographically in that sense. And so
Can I add something here, Marty?
go ahead.
So I co-taught with Marty this year, but before I was co-teaching, I was commissioned to write about Ward 2 for the project. And that was really interesting to me because I'd never had a ward as a muse. So I went around trying to think, well, how do I encounter the ward? And the poets did so many different things. Some people talked about front page news, politics, the sensation of standing on a street corner, buildings. It was interesting what the different muses turned out to be. For me, one of the muses was maps themselves. So how am I going to talk about Ward 2? Well, I wrote a poem about the maps of Ward 2 over time. Where do we see our first map and where are we now? And I think that would have been very interesting for the students too, to see the variety of ways that you can approach a subject.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. It's I wanted to engage them in that. The other book, the Amherstburg book, came about really from a conversation I had with Richard Petty, and he had seen what we had done the year before, and said, "I want to do this with Amherstburg." And I said, "Okay, I could get involved in that." I said, we're going to do this book on Windsor, so why can't we approach it somewhat the same way?" So right after so last spring and through the summer, found local writers, Irene, one of them, and found local writers and basically assign them a ward in some cases, or a particular set of buildings or stories that might be out of Amherstburg. But that's how that book came about, is through Richard Petty, and he wanted to be involved in it. He regards himself as a community builder, which he is, and he's engaged people in kind of getting people in Amherstburg to pay attention to their history, to their streets and to their community, and so he saw this as an opportunity. Sarah, you mentioned something to me about some of the things that the students would bring to it that maybe I didn't expect. The title of the Amherstburg book, "What Time Can't Touch." I mean, they came up with titles for both of these books, but "A Love Letter for Amherstburg" I think that was a discovery that they made once they had all of this work together. They realized that how it was shaped and to whom it was being given were really love letters to this little town. And I just jumped on that when they came up with that, because it just opened my eyes and thinking that's exactly what's happening here with these writers.
Is there a difference in the personality or tone of each of the books?
Yeah. What
Yeah.
do you think, Andre?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the love letter for Amherstburg is sets the tone, the lyrical tone. Um, I mean, it's not that it isn't without the poems aren't without criticism, but even that is part of a book that's basically, like the title says, love letter. Where the map begins is more about identity.
Mhm.
So community building, but what is the identity of the community and in what are its parts?
Yeah, I agree, and I think that when Andre, when you mentioned a love letter, love letters for Amherstburg, you're dealing with a community that knows its own identity, whereas Windsor, people in Windsor in their various wards and in various areas, people who live in Riverside say they live in Riverside. People who live in South Windsor, they're South Windsor people. And or I live downtown, or we have a kind of allegiance, a loyalty to the area in which we live. So we're kind of like, I mean, Windsor is basically 5 towns, is what it is. And so we look upon that particular town in which we live in Windsor, and we have a loyalty to it, and that's our identity. Whereas in Amherstburg, it's one community, one small town, and that's it's one history basically.
One thing we did in Where the Map Begins is we didn't look at Windsor in relation to Detroit. We looked at Windsor in relation to itself, to its own community.
So the practicum students over the years have worked on many kinds of projects with a great variety of authors. But, working on these kinds of community anthologies is kind of a different beast. So what are the opportunities and challenges of working on community anthologies for the students and also for you?
Well, I think one of them is that because it's working with a community, you're getting in touch with far more people. Whereas if we're working with one author, our whole focus is that one author. So, there's lots to be gained by that. But in this case, the communities had to engage themselves in so many other ways. They couldn't. It wasn't dealing, even though students were assigned to work with one author, they had to work with that one author in terms of the context of the whole book, in terms of how it's all related. And so in some cases, it involved getting in touch with city councilors and community builders, that kind of thing. So there was a greater challenge.
There's danger in that too. When you're dealing with the community, always someone is going to feel left out. So you have to be careful about what you're saying, what the constituents are of the community that you're looking at and why they're there. Because you can't write about everything.
True.
That's the peril of that sort of book.
Mm-hmm.
André, I'd like to go to you. Your involvement with the practicum has been a bit more recent. So how did you get involved? What drew you to the program? And what have you come across as you have taken part in the program? What sort of impressions have you got of the program?
Sure. It was Marty who drew me to the program. It's like Marty drew me to the Windsor Review. He said, "Hey, do you want to be the editor for fiction?" And Marty goes around finding people. So he found my first book, and it was a practicum book, and it was up for national award. The practicum can do that kind of work. So I have been filling in for Marty occasionally, and last year I co-taught with him for one term, and then for the whole of this year. And for me, the important thing is that the practicum go on. This is a really, really important class. It's so unusual, and it's so meaningful. And Marty is retiring from active teaching. So I didn't actually intend to teach the practicum. It was more like we went through the list of names of people who could possibly take on this project. And we got to the very bottom of the list. It was just me. So I considered this so important, and I liked what two things that Marty said, two words that he used, flexible and open. That's how I see it going on too. That's what I think will be the big thing.
André, you've worked with Marty as both an author and now as a co-teacher on the publishing side. What have you learned from working with him, and what are you bringing to the table that's maybe a unique spin on it?
Well, I've learned that I'm not as loquacious as he is. You may have heard during this conversation that Marty can talk. Right now I'm looking at it in terms of hurdles, and this is how I am with the project. This is such a big undertaking. So like a lot of people, I put all the hurdles, I stack them up, and there's no getting over them. So I'm trying to imagine it in terms of time. How do I do this in terms of time? So I think really, like I have absolute confidence in the university and in the students. And I think the question of how it will change is more a question you'll have to ask me next year. Because at this point, I always enter a situation, if I'm taking over a class, I always want to do what the last person did, because I assume that the last person had worked on it, had given it a lot of thought, and I should learn what they were doing before I make changes. So going forward, I intend to do things as Marty did, but without that loquaciousness. And we'll see what happens over time.
Yeah, the students do poke fun at all my stories, and
there's a lot of them.
Yeah. Yeah, I know.
André, as you take on more responsibilities going forward, even though, you're going to be feeling things out, what do you feel is the core thing, that special thing that needs to be protected and nourished in this program?
Well, I think that with all English classes, one of the main things we teach is autonomy of thought. So I'm going to have an idea of where I want this to go, and I will have a firm idea, but I want them to be autonomous. So this is a new thing for me. How do I get them to construct something physical that matches my ideas and that suits theirs as well? So I think that's going to be the hardest thing. Plus, I'm going to have to learn a lot of things because I've not published a book. Marty has published many. And by the time he took on this course, he'd already published, what, Marty, 200-300 books?
Yeah.
But at some point you learn.
Yeah, I don't, this year, André was helping out greatly. And I think there were moments when he was a little worried about, certain reactions and are we going to get there? And I say, yeah, we're going to get there. Like, I've been through this. I wasn't worried. It's going to get to the print. Like, basically, I tell the students, it's going to the printer. They know from day one, it's going to the printer on a certain day. They know that. It's in the syllabus. This week is going to the printer. And I say, that can't change. I already talked to the printer. The printer's going to have it that week. And this year I upped the ante a little bit and said it's actually going to go to the printer a couple of days earlier. And so they were working nonstop on this thing. And no, I wasn't worried, partly because I told them, I said, if I don't have it on that day, I'm not going to be worried. I'll just give it to my designer and I will do it myself. And I said, but if I'm doing it myself, where does that leave you? And because that's their job to do. And but they always do it. I mean, I had one year, which was classic, is that there were two books that we were doing, and the one book I was feeling pretty good about. The other book, they were struggling with it, but they finally got it all laid out. But on a Friday afternoon, I was sitting in my office at the university, and they were at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. They're standing. There were about 5 or 6 students standing there, and they said, "I said, what's the problem?" I said, "Well, we have a big problem." I said, "What's the problem?" They said, "Well, you said the book has to go to the printer on Monday." I said, "Yeah, Monday." And they said, "Well, we discovered that we laid out the wrong version. So there had been corrections and everything else had been made, but now this was an earlier version. Somehow, and the thing that I tell them to do when they're laying out these different versions is to put a date and a time on it. So you always know that this is the last one. They hadn't done that, and they'd had the wrong version. So I said, well, what's the problem? I said, well, it's supposed to go on Monday, and this is Friday. It's the weekend. I don't see a problem. Get working. They said, well, you mean like over the weekend? Well, I said, you know what? Don't worry about it. We'll let it go. And they said, really? And I said, yeah, because, um, when we launch the book, if we can't launch it because it won't be done, we'll launch the other book and we'll have a picture of this book and we'll say it's going to, the book eventually will be printed and we'll do that. So, you don't have to. And they say, you're not serious. And I said, yeah, I'm serious. But I don't see the problem. You have the rest of today, all of Saturday, all of Sunday. I will open the door of the lab. You can come in and work. You can get it done. And it was amazing. What they did was some of these students had jobs off campus, working at Tim Hortons or Starbucks or wherever. And they worked in shifts. They organized their time to come and go. And so one person would say, I have to leave because I have to work at 2 o'clock. And so they would leave and then someone would take her place. And I couldn't have organized it better. I couldn't have choreographed it any better. It was a learning experience. And that's part of the point of the practicum in some ways is to teach them, to give them these life skills. It's a learning process. And they teamed up. They really teamed up and organized it themselves. And I came to the university on the weekend and sat in my office and did other things. And if they needed to consult with me, I was there. But basically, I was opening the door. And on Monday, the book was done, and it went off to the printer. And as I say, it was a great experience, for me to watch this. But it was a huge experience for them because they learned to work as a team.
I just want to say here that what we have is an example of a Marty story. And notice how on page it is. This is one of the things that Marty brings. I make fun of his stories, but he uses them to teach.
Yeah, it's a classic. And there's nothing like group work panic. It's a given. So for both of you, imagine 5 or 10 years down the road. Where do you see this program going in the future?
Hopefully it's still going.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that I can imagine that far ahead. It won't involve me. So I'm going to have to create something that somebody else can step into. And that'll be my responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
Marty?
I think it will continue to operate in some form. I don't know what that will be, but there's an opportunity for Windsor to be at the top of their game by having a course that no one else in the country has. This is there are lots of other publishing programs in the country, but they're all theoretical. What they will do in some of these other programs, they're all good programs. I don't mean to dismiss them. Some of them are so good, and they teach you things that we're not teaching because we only have 2 courses. But our course is the only one that's linked with a publisher where you actually look at a book, edit that book, and it's not theoretical, and then you take it through all the paces of actually getting it published and then doing the launch. And the launches are, been doing this for years. We got 200, 300. At one time, we got over 400 people at one of the Italian clubs here in Windsor to show up for this reading. So it's quite amazing what we're doing. And I hope that it continues, and I'm sure we'll find a way to make it continue.
Well, to close things off, for our listeners, Marty, where are the books available?
Right now, if you're in this area, you can pick them up at Biblioasis, at Juniper Books, Storytellers. You can pick them up at River Books, obviously, in Amherstburg, and you can also buy them online. Within the next few weeks, we'll take that distribution a little bit further. So, but that's where you can get them right now.
Excellent. Well, Marty Gervais and André Narbonne, thank you so much for joining us today to talk about the Publishing Practicum and this year's 2 books, Where the Map Begins and What Time Can't Touch. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. That was a lot of fun. Thanks.
Usually at the end of the podcast, we have the author read a selection from the book. This time, we have readings from some of the poets who participated in the anthologies. First, we'll hear from 2 poets in Where the Map Begins.
Kaylee Chapman is a master's student at the University of Windsor in English literature and creative writing. She is currently working on a creative manuscript for her thesis, funded by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, SSHRC. She has been published in 3 chapbooks and was on the editorial team for At the End Beginnings by Christopher Lawrence Menard. Kaylee will be reading her poem, Border Cities Aero Club.
Border Cities Aero Club. Saturday morning at the lounge, the coffee we sip drips warmly into the oak tabletops that line the dull walls inside the Border Cities Aero Club. Back when the Walker Farms owned this land, it was just a farm. At night, human smugglers brought hidden flights using a dirt runway. Hearty chuckles bind our toothy smiles between ears as eager as the drifting snowflakes that plead to enter the windows of the Border Cities Aero Club. Gramps trained here when the terminal was a military barracks. The feds tried to install a 3rd runway. I will never tire the tales of when we lived in the sky. All it takes is when the clouds kiss the wings, the smell of the steel beasts we conquered, of AV gas, of the community we created. And I'm there, man, of the legacy we protected, of the hearts we brought together. I'm back at the Border Cities Aero Club. Because here at the Border Cities Aero Club were people from Windsor who just love to fly.
Our next poet is Peter James Billing. As a poet, author, composer, songwriter, filmmaker, and incredible dishwasher, Peter believes that a great idea at the top of a staircase stays there if not jotted down. You may find him in deep thought in bank lines or drifting off forming stories at cafes, but always ready to listen and support artists in Windsor and Walkerville. Whether by Poe or Puck, rhyme or rhythm, pen or paper, a road hockey game may break out. Peter will be reading his poem, The Glade.
Peter James Billing, Ward 7, Flicker Flash of the Glade Theater. There is poetry seated in movie theater glow, in the dimming of reality, suspension of disbelief, and just for a moment, a flicker flash of time, I'm gone. Even in the whisper that fell my dreamscape building in 2013, the Forest Glade cinemas were the movie trailers of my life, or where it began. A flicker flash of time, I'm back, learning to cry if my brother did, as a boy on a bike flew over a moon with an alien hidden from sight, or as months flip calendar reels as ghosts bust out in the night. It was there among transient dreams, popcorn screams, birthday parties, friendship follies, first date jitters, movie star glitter, where such things I'd love to say. What time does Back to the Future start tonight at the Glade?
Next, we'll hear from 2 poets from What Time Can't Touch.
Barry Brody is a poet, playwright, actor, director, and teacher. He has written 2 books, The Language of the Star, Journals of the Magi, and Tom Thompson, On the Threshold of Magic. His poetry has appeared in Amethyst Review and the Orchards Poetry Journal. He held the chair in religion and the arts at Assumption University, co-founded Show, Art, Spirit, and Performance, and currently teaches a course on the creative process at the University of Windsor. Barry will read his poem, Mrs. Dunbar and the Museum Tea Room, 1934.
Mrs. Dunbar and the Museum Tea Room, 1934. She invites us to dine in English refine. We choose from a menu of food favorably cooked and pleasingly served. lunches and dinners eagerly sought by the casual or frequent visitor. But another menu awaits of artifacts and documents, appetizers of locks and keys and firearms, entrees of spinning wheels and cannonballs, sauces from peaceful industry and warfare weaponry, a map of 1657 for dessert. Mrs. Dunbar keeps an elegant room, offers a balanced meal of war and peace.
Karen Rockwell is a lesbian poet, flash fiction author, and accidental artist who considers color her home, chaos a friend, and words her salvation. Author of Curious Connections, a chapbook of flash fiction published in 2016 by Urban Farmhouse Press, Karen is published in journals and anthologies in Canada, the US, and the UK. Recognition includes first place in Room's 2013 Poetry Contest and in Polar Expression's 2011 Story Contest, second place in Brooklyn Poetry Society's 2018 Poetry Contest, among others. Karen will read a selection from a longer poem, Letter from Mary Ann Pollard, 1864.
Pensioners Cottage, 214 Dalhousie Street, Amherstburg. Letter from Mary Ann Pollard, 1864. Dear Miss Rockwell, I do hope your journey home was pleasant and without incident. The moment your carriage pulled away, I was filled with regret that I did not allow myself to speak in your presence. When you asked about my life, I could only think, what would I have to say to a worldly poet such as yourself? I cannot read nor write, was ashamed to tell you. I sat tongue-tied listening as the others spoke. It was Mrs. Brown who made me change my mind, says I should call her Charlotte, but being my employer, it just doesn't sit well. She is amused as she writes down every word I say, has a way of making things lighter, says I have as much right as anyone else to tell my story, insists I let her help me, so I will. I came from the Jersey Islands where I met my Matthew. He was there with the army from Ireland, caught my eye in the commissary. Much older than I, but had a boy's smile. My parents, being Irish, were in favor of him. They saw he had less than 2 years left to serve, thought that meant he would marry me and stay close by. He said it did. We were soon wed, and in a blink had our Mary and Jenny. Matthew did retire, but was offered a pensioner's post as a monthly guard in the colonies. We would have a cottage of our own. We were to board a ship called Hope. As my parents wept, I assured them the name was a sign from the good Lord that all would be well. I believed it in full.
We've been talking with Marty Gervais and André Narbonne about the University of Windsor Publishing Practicum and those 2 books this year, Where the Map Begins and What Time Can't Touch. They're available on the Black Moss Press website and at independent bookstores in Windsor and Amherstburg.
Thanks for joining us. Look for more episodes of All Right in Sin City wherever you listen to podcasts, or check out our website, allrightinsincity.com. For information and announcements of new podcasts, sign up to our email list or follow us on Facebook and Twitter.